Hi, this is Paul. I wanted to make one more video yet this week. And as always, my videos are sort of thinking through what's going on in my channel, at least my monologues. The conversations obviously go on a different schedule in some ways because other people come in and change my thinking. Anselman is in some ways the king of the comments, and Vixen Dixon is the queen. Those of you who follow the little first game will know that she is the queen. But Anselman, as is one of our most reliable commenters, obviously deeply Christian man. We haven't had a conversation yet. I don't know, one of these days I think we should. Also, there's different little sub-communities. It's kind of swirling around my channel, and Anselman is very much king in the comments, but he's not in the Discord. And so there's all these tiny little sub-communities that I've gotten to know in this process. He left a comment on my conversation with Brett Andersen basically, what are my videos about? My videos are about things I read or listen to that stick in my head for at least a day or two, and I feel the need to comment on them because I think they're important or noteworthy, or they've risen in my salience hierarchy. And this is what he says to the conversation. I admit to being increasingly weary at so often hearing all the warmed-over rehashing of the dogmatic ideas that wish to depersonalize the Logos and sidestep the truth of Jesus Christ as Creator and God incarnate, to promote a religion of evolutionary progress that makes Jesus of Nazareth incidental and not the personal Alpha and Omega. The same old mythology of all religion, in quotes, being an invention of human beings evolving from non-human animals, drag knuckle, working their way by trial and error towards some self-devised final resolution. There is a rejection of the fact of the Creator having given a reliable revelation of himself as recorded in the Holy Bible. It is simply an avoidance of accountability to God and the demands of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. You do not help people to come to Christ by trying to fit Christianity into their fanciful theories which seek to relativize Christianity. There's a lot in that. And I'm sympathetic to the comment in many ways, which might strike some of you as peculiar because, Anselman later on had wished that I had pushed back more fervently with some of the things that Brett had said, and other people said, well, that's not really what Paul is doing, and we can always have that conversation. And so I've been thinking about this comment for a little while now. And this morning I woke up, and as I usually do early in the morning, I start to think about, okay, what is arising in my mind? What am I sort of percolating at? This makes me sort of think about Freud and Jung comparing notes on their dream interpretations, which part of the annoying thing about reading Jung for me is always so many dreams, so much interpretation, just seems so distant. Of course, some of you will think very differently of that. But so this morning, I just had the question, is God in the public domain? And then later, is God and the gospel in the public domain? I could totally relate to Anselman's point, and I could also, as you could probably tell from the conversation, really feel the excitement of mutual discovery. I really enjoyed my conversation with Brett, and I thought it was. Someone commented in the comments, it sounds like he's talking dull. I thought the video was on 2x because Brett is very sharp and very clear, and he speaks very well, and out it comes very quickly, and so you have to kind of brace yourself and get, keep up with the fire hose and figure out what all is going on. I thought it was quite a remarkable conversation. But it very much gets into this question that Anselman raises. And so part of what I do in my channel is, if I'm going to be sort of blunt and sometimes a little cavalier with celebrity atheists, I should be, just out of fairness, equally blunt and cavalier with those of us in the church. And so this question about God, and and Jesus. Now, of course, these weeks I've got double the work and half the time, so I probably shouldn't be making a video at all. So what I try to do is make sure that my video making and my sermonizing to put out sermons and messages for New Year's Eve and for next Sunday kind of coalesce, and they sort of do this week because as those of you on the Discord know, I jumped into the open studio one day and said, should I start in the book of the Bible or stick with the lectionary a little bit longer? And of course, some people had ideas like Zephaniah and Leviticus. I didn't go with that, and I stuck with the lectionary finally. And the lectionary passage for, at least the Revised Common Lectionary for next Sunday is John 1 with the Logos. And Anselman is right in that. I mean, he's watched my channel as closely as anyone. He comments on pretty much every video, almost right away, almost as fast as the Queen. But, and he's right in terms of one of the big issues that I'm wrestling with is this question of personhood and the depersonalization and what's going on in this space. In a lot of ways, this goes back to Jordan Peterson. And early on, there were a lot of, what's an analogy that Christians can use for Jordan Peterson? And eventually I settled on, and over time I continue to be happy with my analogy as Jordan Peterson as the unauthorized exorcist. Well, what is an exorcist doing? He's relieving people of demonic possession. And there's the story in the Gospel of Mark, which has always fascinated me. "Teacher," said John, "we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he was not one of us." "Do not stop him," Jesus says, "for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. Whoever is not against us is for us. Truly I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah will certainly not lose their reward." There is so much mystery in this passage. But, in some ways, Jordan Peterson gave the church a cup of water in Jesus' name. This stuff gets tricky, and of course my status as a Christian minister makes it in some ways more tricky. And sort of what Jordan Peterson did was, well, maybe I should keep going with the video because I have an idea where I'm going. Never a very clear idea. Christians sort of have I can understand people outside the church and non-Christians watching Christians carefully, if they bother watching at all, with a little bit of wonderment about some things, because Christians love public vindication. So when, of course, the priest comes up with the idea of the Big Bang and it catches and it becomes scientific orthodoxy, and I noted someone on the video, I do really read the comments. I can't get to them all generally, but I very regularly go through the comments and read or skim. And one person said, "I didn't know that Christians complained at all about the Big Bang." So one should get out more to certain places, especially in American evangelicalism. And even in the sort of boundary water place that the Christian Reformed Church is, kind of this strange territory sometimes between high church and low church, between mainline and evangelical. So you get all sorts of interesting arguments coming through the Christian Reformed Church one way or another. Everyone's sort of grasping at its flag. But this sort of reminds me, and you can't have something like, let's say, the Discovery Institute or intelligent design or creation science unless you're really looking for vindication. You're looking for vindication. You're looking for collaboration or better, perhaps corroboration from the natural world that our story is true. And that's a really helpful thing to do if we'd like to not be Gnostic, because we want to have one story. We want to have one universe through and through. We want there to be one truth. And so sometimes Christians kind of give me the impression, of course, I had 5 kids, and you get a lot of experience having 5 kids. And sometimes you hold a toddler, your toddler, and someone comes up to you, and maybe it's another kid, and you're paying attention to another child, and the toddler kind of looks in a fit of jealousy and says, well, he's my daddy, not your daddy. And Christians kind of do this sometimes. And understandably so. Now, the toddler has a point, and it's jealousy, not envy, because, yeah, he is my daddy. And so I do lay claims to him because he has laid claims to me. But daddy, of course, knows how to relate and navigate the complexities of these relationships better than the toddler. And so I very much understand Anselman's weariness with respect to this. That, yeah, it's, and he's right, and I'm in some sense with him, that beneath certain currents there is a desire to, by making God public domain, making him a God that we can wield. And that is finally the ambition behind magic, right? It's the ambition behind Tim Keller's definition of religion in the sermons he was, this is awfully obscure, the sermons he was preaching in the mid-aughts. And Tim Keller, when I first started listening to Tim Keller around 2006, he was on a tear about Christianity versus religion. And obviously, religion is a very fudgy, very sloshy word that we're continuing to try to get to the roots of. But in order for the claims, the universal claims of Christianity to be true, you're going to have to live with these tensions, because he's not just my daddy, he's our daddy. And if he's the creator of all, then he not only, quite rightly, makes claims on those who are not within the church or don't consider themselves in relationship to the Christian articulation of this Father, but Christians are going to have to figure out how to bear witness to this Father in a way that others who have very different ideas, and by virtue of social status and many other reasons, are going to oppose Christian formulations of these ideas. And so, this is a very estuary-like move here, where we try to figure out, okay, well, how do we talk about this? And I really enjoyed my conversation with Brett, and I thought that conversation went very well. And so I think there we are in some ways in the church. You can't go to church and sing "This is my Father's world" and not at the same time imagine that others outside the church are going to have something to say, and that we in the church should listen. And of course, we would like them to listen to us, but he's my daddy. Yes, he is. But he's also out there in the world making claims of fatherhood over many, many others who don't seem to be in your little family. How do we navigate these waters? This isn't an easy question. It's funny when I listen to celebrity atheists talk about the Bible and point out all of the things that don't fit and things that don't fit with the church and Christianity. And I think, yeah, you're not reading it every week like I am. You read through the Bible and there's going to be a lot of things that you begin to scratch your head and say, are these features or bugs? And, well, makes for interesting conversations. A lot of difficult, problematic, offensive things in the Bible. There was a guy, if I remember his name correctly, Neil Punt, who was a retired minister of the Christian Reformed Church. I guess you should all worry about me and my retirement. If I'm saying this stuff now, what am I going to say when I'm retired, when the pension is locked in, and basically the worst they can do is sort of take away my privileges of preaching and serving sacraments. He wrote a book. He wrote a couple of books on biblical universalism, as he called it, and I thought I really appreciated it. And some people took shots at him and critiqued him, and fairly so and rightly so. But I just like the chutzpah of it all, and Christian exclusivism. And this is sort of what we're talking about. That Christianity makes audacious claims, and Christianity's audacious claims come from our book. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Wow, but that's got to live with a bunch of other claims in the Bible, which are dramatic. One of the points that I made in one of the Friday question and answer, there won't be again one this week, but the week after I'm sure we'll do another one. Christianity has to deal with the question of, and Abram Kuyper, one of the lights of my own tradition, you had both common grace and the antithesis, and these two things have to live together. It's sort of like, I often make the comparison with bounded set and centered set ideas, and for a while it was very fashionable in the Christian church we're trying to get out of our rigid hierarchies and our ossification of our traditions. And so young radicals would wave the flag of, well, we need to have more of a bounded set theory of community rather than boundary markers. So it's a center set rather than a bounded set. And it's kind of, you can find a bunch of that if you Google that. And that was really something to be talked about 10 or 15 years ago, and words and ideas have their fashions too. Well, common grace and the antithesis sort of live like that too, because I looked at bounded set and centered set and said, they really live in dynamic relationship with each other over time, because once the center moves, it creates a new bounded set. And you can only understand the movement of a centered set by virtue of watching the boundary markers and the bounded set. And you notice this with two ideas like common grace and the antithesis. The antithesis is, well, it's in a sense binary. It's black, white, right, wrong, good, bad, in, out. And common grace is much more of this analog where, well, God's grace is littered throughout the world, and pagans and people far from God and people of other religious traditions can know truth and speak truth, sometimes to the shame and embarrassment of people within the church. And so common grace and the antithesis always live in a universe together. And part of navigating through life with wisdom is figuring out the play of the antithesis. When are we antithetical, and when are we much more analog and gracious? And it's in our actions that we decide and get right or get wrong when to make those movements. And so how in the public domain is the knowledge of God? And the Bible has actually a lot to say about that. I really enjoyed N.T. Wright's book, Paul, a Biography. And those of you who want to learn more about Paul or N.T. Wright's work can take up that book. I enjoyed that book. And it's one of these books that I want to reread and come back to, because you can learn a lot from Dr. Wright. Paul of Tarsus, though, continues to be one of the most influential and divisive figures of human history. And in some ways, in different ways from Jesus. In a couple of hours, I'm going to talk to Jacob, who, if you're on the Discord server, you know who he is, who really is fascinated with Jesus and really likes Jesus. And hopefully we'll get into that in our conversation today. But really doesn't like Paul at all. And this, of course, annoys some of the Christians in the Discord. And I just have fun watching the conversations go back and forth. And Jacob's view of Paul, Jacob's not alone. Just read the book of Acts. Now, the book of Acts is written by Luke, who, it seems quite clear, Paul had a tremendous influence on Luke. And of course, Luke is one of the authors of the four four canonical gospels in the Bible, one of the three synoptic gospels. And of course, Luke also writes the book of Acts. And so Luke is a fan. Luke is a friend of Paul of Tarsus. And Luke doesn't at all cover up the... Yeah, someone might complain that Acts get a little hagiographic with respect to Paul, perhaps. But Luke doesn't cover up the fact that it seemed everywhere Paul went, things get very antithetical very fast. And people are always trying to kill Paul. And at one point, Paul makes a list of all the things that he suffered from. And my goodness, if he had had a real nice therapist, someone would have sat down and said, Paul, maybe you should lighten up. But Paul's not about to lighten up. And Paul goes on a tear throughout the ancient world and leaves ruptured synagogues in his wake. And both the Greeks, as they would be called in the Eastern Roman Empire, and Jews of some of these cities wanted to kill him. And he goes back to Jerusalem. And in fact, he has to appeal to the Romans to try to save his life from the people in Jerusalem, quite likely whose coats that he held at the stoning of Stephen. So, yeah, Paul of Tarsus, boy, what a guy. And enormously controversial. And even he goes on in the Pauline epistles, and you can have your debates over which ones were written by him and how the other ones were formed, on and on and on. But it's a large and influential portion of the New Testament, and a large and influential portion of Christianity, and especially Protestantism, who, thanks to Luther, really sort of doubled down on Luther's vision of Paul, right or wrong. And by Luke's account, like Jesus, he's just when I say troublemaker, I don't mean that poor. I mean, he's going to say things that polarize people, just like Jesus did. And I think part of the reason we don't see that from Jesus is Jesus has had such dramatically good press, probably from the 1960s and the hippie movements, that somehow they saw Jesus as this quivering mass of tolerance. Well, just don't read the Gospels too carefully. And Paul's just like him in that way. But, that's not in and of itself necessarily a good thing. There's lots of people like that. It's partly personality, partly the sign of the times. Donald Trump has been like that. And so I thought for this video I might read through Paul in Athens. Now, for some of you, it's a very familiar thing, but for others, it might be new. Now, at the risk of giving a endorsement, even though I would endorse it, I've used Logos Bible software for a very long time, or an unpaid promotion of them. I thought, well, I don't want to do a whole bunch of cut and pasting. I'm just gonna go right from the software. And you go to Acts chapter 17, Paul and Silas are in Berea. Now the brothers sent away both Paul and Silas at once during the night in Berea. They went into the synagogue of the Jews when they arrived. Now they were more open-minded than those in Thessalonica, and they accepted the message with all eagerness, examining the scriptures every day to see if these things were so. And so a whole bunch of Protestant churches really love the Bereans, and you can find Berean Bible churches all over the place in the United States. Therefore, many of them believed, and not a few prominent Greek women and men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica found out that the message of God had been proclaimed, of course, Luke is not writing impartially here. Luke has a dog in all of these fights. Had been proclaimed by Paul in Berea. Also, they came there too, inciting and stirring up the crowds. So when the brothers sent Paul away at once to go to the sea, and both Silas and Timothy remained. So again, it's very interesting that it's Paul they really hate, and Silas and Timothy can sort of go under the radar and stay there and continue to share some of their teaching and some of the encouragement that they're going to give to some of those who in Berea are sort of enamored by Paul's preaching of the resurrection. In the book of Acts, the preaching of the resurrection is something that is brought forward again and again. And those who conducted Paul, those who And those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving an order for Silas and Timothy that they should come to him as soon as possible, they went away. So Paul has to flee Thessalonica and Berea, and he goes to Athens, and he's got to kind of cool his heels. Well, they're in Athens, but, Paul's going to do what Paul's going to do. Now, one of the things I tell people, if they've been reading the Bible for a long time, it's always fun to find another translation to read the Bible from, because if you've got, what happens is that the Bible, especially if you've learned it from your childhood, it's all imprinted in your head, and unless you're, say, looking at Greek or something else, it's these patterns get set. So read it in a different translation and get a different sense. So I'm reading from this Lexicon English Bible, which is, I actually like this translation, basically for some of its virtues, that it's different, and it tries to be a little bit wooden like the old King James or the New American Standard. It doesn't, they're not doing as much interpreting, let's say. Well, they are. I mean, how to quantify these things. It's not as heavily chewed, let's say, like the NIV, and certainly not something like the New Living Translation. And they're not looking over certain shoulders like the ESV is, and it's just a translation done by some of the scholars within the people who are putting out this Bible software. So, it's not a big thing, but I often find it helpful. And all the little tools within Logos that you can use, you can see the different verbs and stuff are highlighted. And these are just things that I do that when you read, that you can just pay attention to some of the Greek text underneath. If you're going through English instead of, I don't go through Greek very well or very quickly, so it's just faster to use English. And so if you don't know Greek at all, you can learn these little hacks and tricks to sort of get at certain aspects of the text. So now Paul is in Athens, and while he's waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him. Now maybe we'll throw up one of the nice things that you can do in here is you can sort of make it sort of an interlinear. I mean, obviously in the other one you can make it full interlinear. And here you can, let's just link these panels. Let's just do that. I think this one's already linked. No. Yeah, it's already linked. Okay. So, scroll up a little bit. Where are we going? Okay. So Paul's in Athens, and he's waiting for them in Athens, and his spirit is provoked. Let's try not to lose my place now. Proclaimed in Berea, sent away, Silas and remained, conducted him as far as Athens after receiving an order. So now Paul's waiting, his spirit is provoked within him, and he observed the city was full of idols. The city was full of idols. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that it's a ancient, very important Greek city, and it's very religious. And now, as I tweeted today, I can't use that word and not have Tom Holland now ringing in my ears about, of course, this city is religious. The city is ancient. The city is important. The city is storied. And the city is connected with philosophy and a good many aspects of that world. Going through this, I just have to make all these decisions about what I want to stop on and what I don't want to stop in. So the city is, so there's all these, well, again, you're reading in an English Bible about, well, the city is full of images. Now this full of images is obviously going to trigger his Jewish sensitivities with respect to things, although Paul grew up in Tarsus, and so he certainly understood the way these cities were far better than any of us today do, but he noticed that in some ways Athens was more so. What do you mean full of images, full of eidos, figures? And so I've been spending some time with the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. Those of you who are in the pastoral profession know it as Kittel. And there's big kittle and little kittle. So if you get curious about this, you can always get the 1-volume abridged version of Little Kittle, which doesn't require Greek knowledge, and it's a little bit less exhaustive. But of course, what's the meaning of these images? Well, these are images of people. These are images of gods. And how are these images functioning in that city? And what power do these images give? And how do they function psychologically? And, are they religious? And now a little bit later, so when you read, let's just hop over to the NIV. When we read these things as 21st century Christians now, oh man, as Protestants especially, when Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. She didn't expect this. Well, what's going on in Paul's mind? They certainly would have expected this. He's no stranger to the Hellenistic world, but Athens more so. And idols. Well, what do you mean by idols? Now we've got all of this Old Testament gods of wood and stone. And he's provoked in spirit, the one translation says, and he's let's see what the ESV says. He was provoked. His spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. Another fun translation that you can pull is, which is one that's quite easily available, the NET, which often has a lot of good notes, and it's sort of fun. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was greatly upset. Greatly upset with him, but the words within him were not included in the translation because they're redundant in English. His spirit was greatly upset, see Romans 18, about idolatry when he saw the city was full of idols. Why would Paul be upset by that? Because he cares about the Greeks? Because Athens is a prominent city? So he was addressing the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles in the synagogue. Okay, so what does that say? Well, there's a diasporic community in Athens, just like there seems to be just about everywhere else. I read one thing that said that the Jews were perhaps 10% of the Roman Empire, which is a pretty sizable minority. African Americans are 12% of the population of the United States. So, think about in those terms. And of course, they're not distributed evenly. I've done a little bit of reading about Philo this morning because of where logo studies have brought me. But Paul gets to Athens and he's upset because of the number of idols. And so then, this probably just sort of sticks in his craw. But then he goes to the synagogue, of course, because those are his people, and he's about, he might just turn that one over on its head too, as he seems to be doing everywhere he goes. And of course, in the synagogue, as there seem to be in all the other synagogues, are Jews, which would be people who are formally Jews, which would mean that the men are circumcised, and then God-fearers. And these God-fearers are people in the synagogue who are men who are not circumcised, but they're curious and they're sort of participating and aligning, but they've not gone all the way. And now, again, if you take a look at Philo of Alexandria, who does some writing on circumcision, circumcision is kind of a big deal in this little subset. We could think of that perhaps sort of like women in office was a big deal in the Christian Reformed Church, or same-sex marriage a big deal in a lot of denominations. It's something that people are talking about, and because circumcision was a big deal. It was a big deal for a lot of different reasons. And so he's in the synagogues, but he's got all the highly religious, we'll use that word again, the highly religious nature of this city of Athens, and it's bothering him. And so he goes to the synagogue, and he's talking and he's meeting with them. So he was addressing the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles in the synagogue and in the marketplace every day. And you get a sense of, I guess, what would Paul be like on YouTube? Probably be stirring up stuff too. He'd have way more subscribers than I do. He would probably be more loved and more hated in some ways. Although, there's a troubling dynamic that seems to happen with respect to Jesus and Paul, that, they both seem to have a certain small group around them that was fiercely loyal, but beyond that, I mean, Jesus, of course, gets crucified while his, at least, hardcore male followers are hiding and just leaving the women and children to witness the crucifixion. And, to whatever degree you look at, the books of Timothy with respect to Paul, the image of Paul there is kind of dejected and a little bit alone. Not a lot of people swarming around him and defending him. Yet, via these letters, his influence has grown over history far more than it was in his day. You also get the sense when you read the New Testament carefully that, there's a lot of other people sort of doing what Paul is doing. And you look at the Didache too, this early document where they're giving specific instructions on what to do with all these itinerant preachers. You have itinerant preachers showing up in 1 John as well, and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, those issues. So it's a very live environment, and Paul is one of these guys going around it. Paul is a very noteworthy example of what's happening, and now, of course, all of our focus goes to him because his letters were cherished and copied and passed around and have been given high status for centuries and centuries to come. So he's bothered by all of the statuary in the book in the city of Athens and the way it's regarded, and then he goes to the synagogue and he's arguing and wrangling in the synagogue. But he's also wrangling in the marketplace every day, and those who happen to be there. So he's just kind of, like, who's that guy who sets up the table? Prove me wrong. Jesus rose from the grave there in the marketplace of Athens. Is it Crowder? Is that his name? I'm a bad YouTuber. Don't know my fellow YouTubers as well as I should. YouTube is too big to know. But so he's arguing with people. Also, some of the Epicureans and Stoic philosophers were conversing with him. These lovers of wisdom, the Epicureans and the Stoics. And now if you listen to N.T. Wright, these were, two of the dominant philosophies in the region at the time. And so Paul's talking to Epicureans and Stoics. And then he gets invited. In some ways, perhaps Paul sort of hits the big time here. And what's fun, again, if you look at the English, they were conversing with him. They were having a conversation. But, I'm always nosy, so then you take a little peek beneath the English and you say, well, what's going on with that? What's going on with that Greek word? And this having these conversations, well, what is that? It's a sumbalo, and you can even have we'll see if the computer picks this up.
Sumbalo.
I guess it does. I saw the little bar move, but I don't have the headphones on. So, and then you can click on over to a Greek lexicon. You can kind of scroll down here, and it's a very interesting word because it's sort of, you're considering, you're pondering, you're drawing conclusions. What you're doing is you're comparing. That's what you're doing when you're having these conversations. What's he doing in the marketplace? He's sort of comparing notes with the Epicureans and the Stoics, and they're mixing it up a little bit. And some of them are saying, what does this babbler want to say? Now, when you see a word like that in English, you think, well, what are they trying to get at? What a babbler? What's a babbler? Who, they're using it too. In the NIV, yeah, babbler. Now you can switch over to the NET and conversing. Oh, look at this. To converse, confer. Foolish babbler. Ignorant show-off. Traditional English translation. And here the Greek word is very interesting. It's a spermologos. Well, what is that? It's sperm. Sounds sexual. Well, sperm is, of course, seed. So it's a word salad. No, it's seed wording. It's a nitpicker. It's someone who's picking up little bits off the ground. Now, again, the NIT has pretty good notes on this kind of stuff. So Figurative expression of meaning, a term based on the practice of birds picking up seeds. One who acquired bits and pieces of relatively extraneous information and proceeds to pass them off with a pretense and show. Maybe that's me. Because I'll tell you, the more I read, the more I realize I know less and less, and then I think I shouldn't be on YouTube talking, but okay, fair warning. I can be wrong a lot of the time, and go ahead and fact check me, and please review my sources, and if you come to different conclusions, well, I can't stop you. So yeah, it's a very pejorative thing to say. What is this idiot talking about? He's not part of us here in Athens with our own schools where we know everything, but of course he has his own little Jewish community there, and they know things, and you very much get a picture of the world where, well, we're all sitting here in our little tribes, and here in Athens, everyone's comparing notes, but all of those idols all over the place is just provocative. He seems to be proclaiming of foreign gods, and I thought, oh boy, there's got to be something going on under foreign gods. What is he talking about? And again, you can just pop on over, and what verse are we in? Proclaiming foreign gods, the end of 18. Okay, these are I'll pull up. This will be a little easier for you. It's also fun to read these interlinears to see, because they just kind of take the lexical use and they throw it in and makes no English sense. So the Epicureans and Stoic philosophers were throwing together at him basically, and some were saying that, well, he's a seed collector, a spermologos, and he's standing up to tell them the good news. He's preaching at them. And then they want to take it. Where are we going? Okay, this is what I wanted to get. So is Xenon. It's foreign gods. Foreign. Why would you in English use foreign, strange, xenophobia? That's the word that comes in. So these are Xenon demons. He's bringing in strange demons. What does that mean? Again, you're never going to read that in your English Bible. He's a proclaimer of strange demons. Well, daimon. Well, what are those? Well, those are the spirits. Well, those are the things that energize matter. Those are the things that move us. And when you think about an evil spirit, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about something that's moving people, and it might be, and this is why Jordan Peterson is in some ways the unauthorized exorcist, because what he did was he exorcised people of certain ideologies, and that's why Jordan Peterson was the he was the troubler of the youth. He corrupted the youth, as Jordan Peterson has done. And so now the Apostle Paul, he's bringing in these strange demons. Well, what are these demons? Paul is a troublemaker, and he's very demonic in this sense. Oh, now and this is the thing about language. I've just triggered a whole bunch of you because I'm just playing with words here, aren't I? And maybe I'm being a seed picker, a spermologos. And see, this is what happens when I don't do my homework. This is what happens when I just read, because it's all messy, and on Sunday it's got to come out and make some kind of sense, but I'm not preaching on this Sunday. So he's telling them this message. And again, in the English translation, it gets all nicely tucked in. The Epicurean philosophers were conversing with him, and some were asking, what does this foolish babbler want to say? Seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods. So it's the strange demons that he's proclaiming. They said this because he was proclaiming the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took Paul and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new teaching is that he is proclaiming. So they took Paul and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new teaching is that he is proclaiming? For you are bringing some surprising things, more strange things to our ears, so we want to know what they mean. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there used to spend their time in nothing else but telling or listening to something new. Something new. They liked new things. These were people of great luxury. They could afford the statues, and they had the time to sit around and talk. That's what they prioritized in their life. So Paul stood before the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I see that you are very religious. Well, what on earth word are you going to use for religious underneath there? Oh, No, actually, yeah, the NIT is pretty good. I wasn't looking at the NIT when I was just looking at some of the stuff this morning. You get a word like this.
Daisy-daimon. Daisy-daimon.
Well, what is that? They're a fear of the demons, of the daimons. What does that mean? Well, that they understand that these powers, these spiritual powers, are shaping and molding the earth, and they're fearers of them. Are they God-fearers? Well, that would be, they're at least spirit-fearers. Well, now this fear is respecters, and their fascination, and it has their attention, and it has their anxiety. And so Paul says to them, I see, but of course in English, you're very religious. Well, what does that say about our use of that word? So I see that you are all very afraid of demons. No, that's not quite right. You're all very concerned about the things that move matter and nature. And that's why you're always talking about these ideas, because people don't have ideas. Ideas have people, and ideas rule the world, and ideas go through our society, and ideas mean some people get elected, and some people get prosecuted, and some people get killed, and some people win, and some people lose. For human beings, ideas count dramatically. And so he says, well, I see you're all very
Daisy-daimon.
Devout? These frames. For as I went around and observed closely at your objects of worship, well, yeah, the entity is quite good. They're your sanctuaries. Oh, yeah, I did. I looked at this morning a little bit. Part of what I'm trying to do... Okay, is God in the public domain or not? Part of what I'm trying to do is offer for you a sense of what the relevant issues are here according to the conversations that we've been having. Because in many ways, if you read through it in your English Bible, and if you've had just enough church to make you cynical, you're not going to come out of this with, I think, a little better view than you might have of what's happening, at least through other frames and other lenses of what's going on in the ancient world. So I'm retranslating some of this stuff. I guess this is why people like Eugene Peterson and David Bentley Hart write their own translations of the New Testament. But boy, we seem to go through them quickly because, well, what frame are we in here? Well, why do these men in Athens spend all of their time talking? And why are the Epicureans and the Stoics so prominent? And why do they, probably well-heeled people, they like philosophy and they've earned some money, or they have, someone supporting them, so they go to Athens so they can, it's basically what we're doing in the Discord server or here on YouTube. We want to know what moves the world. Not just my little world, but the whole world. Well, what on earth is that? Can we get our minds around that? And so you've got your little synagogue in Athens, and you've got your Areopagus, and you've got all of the people, again, it's not different from going into the Discord server, and you've got your people who are promoting this or promoting that or going to Twitter, and you find all of this. And so Paul is sort of using his nicest language here. He was disturbed by all the images, and he's looking around and saying, well, you all are pretty concerned about these diamonds, these... See, if I use the word demon, that sends us down a whole new path. But again, the path isn't irrelevant. But what language can I have to really use that will communicate with you? And why is a pastor on YouTube doing this stuff anyway? Because this is my quest. Because I want to find language that can work for you. And in order to do this, I need to listen to you, and I need to listen to people in a particular physical address, and I need to read the Bible, and I need to learn about Philo, and I need to go to Yosemite like I did yesterday with my family, which was a great trip. And you'll notice some new pictures came onto the channel because of this. I saw those saw those ravens. Are they ravens? I think they're ravens. They're pretty big. They're quite fascinating to watch. Didn't put the picture up of the coyote that people were feeding. Don't feed wild animals. Anyway, so I'm trying to figure this out. How can we talk about this? How can we understand it? How can we understand what happened between Paul and the people at the Areopagus? And we're reading this via Luke. And so okay, so you're quite interested in these diamonds, these demons, these things, these spirits that are moving us, the spirits that are moving through the world, and you're trying to map these. And so you have the Epicureans and you have the Stoics, and of course Plato was a while ago, and a lot of people think Philo was a Middle Platonist, but Philo was also a Jew. And so what did the Jews believe at that time, and what were their factions? And so Paul goes into the synagogue, and what is he about to know and about to bump into? And of course you can read N.T. Wright. I didn't do enough homework for this. Maybe I'll talk about this with Jacob today. And so Paul keeps talking. So I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. And then you read Tom Holland, when you get, a few centuries later, and people are figuring out that the proliferation of gods is a real problem, because if you're very, I should put my headphones on and hear this so I can at least say it with some kind of correctness. Not Xenos, that's easy. Boy, this is a bad video.
Daisy Daimon.
Daisy Daimon. I'm such an auditory listener. If that's what you're like, if you're always fearing the diamonds, if you're always fearing them and anxious about them and worried about them, yeah, we might in the secular society call that religious. Not a bad translation. But if you're always fearing them, then put up a statue in case you miss somebody. That just makes sense. And there's probably traditions of that too. And we have in our nation the tomb of the unknown soldier. Well, what is that about? Well, not everybody who's given their life in a foreign war gets their remains identified and shipped home. So this sort of covers them. And Paul decides, like a good preacher, finds a local illustration and is going to dive in order to make his case for the Greeks who are so...
Daisy Daimon. Daisy Daimon.
It's kind of fun just pressing the button and hearing the dude talk.
Daisy Daimon.
I'm really a child. Anyway, the God who made the world and everything in it. That's pretty public domain. Who is the Lord of heaven and earth. That's pretty public domain. Does not live in temples made by human hands. This is the guy who held the cloak when Stephen was basically making noise about that iconoclast Jesus who cursed the fig tree and said, the temple's coming down next. Did I say iconic? Did I say Jesus was an iconoclast? Oh boy, am I in trouble. So who is this Lord of heaven, and who doesn't live in temples made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands served and as if he needed anything? And of course, here you've got, well, what happens in these temples? Well, you're feeding the gods, and this is what the gods need, and this is sort of the economy, the religious economy with the gods, that, well, you can go to the gods and have an exchange, give the gods what they want, and then the God will give you what you want. And isn't that why you go to church and tithe? So, if you do all these things for God and he gives you what you want, and that's why you're so offended. This is Tim Keller's point back in 2006. That's why you're so offended when your life goes bad. And he says, hey, I believed in all the doctrines and I gave my tithe. I was a good person. That's sort of a secularized generic. I'm a good person. Things are supposed to be good for me. It's so ironic when people go around preaching karma. I'm thinking, yeah, really, you really want to go down that route? As Earl used to say, karma's a bitch. Anyway. Nor is he served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives life and breath and everything to everyone. Paul's making some pretty public domain claims here about this God, and yeah, people are going to be upset about this. Now, they're used to talking ideas, so they're probably not going to want to kill him after, which, seems to be what happens to Paul in most places. So maybe Paul would be a little bit safer if he stayed in Athens, but of course, he's not going to do that because he's a traveling man and he's just going to keep traveling. He's going to say even more explosive stuff. From one man he made every nation of the human race to inhabit the entire earth, determining their set times and the fixed limits of the places where they would live. There's a whole nother interesting thing to go into, which I'm not going to go into now. So that they would search for God and perhaps grope around for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. I like this translation. I think the NAT it's got some pizzazz here. I like the fact that they use the word grope. It's a good word in correct contexts. So the idea is that, well, he's in public domain. You can find him, and in fact, he wants you to go look for him. Well, why is he so hard to find? Well, look into that question too. What's really going on? And what do we mean by this word God? And because that's very much at play there in many ways, because the Epicureans and the Stoics and the various philosophical groups at play will have very different understandings. And here Paul is a Jew making this argument. His God, there's a lot of stories about his God. And it's kind of a one God thing and not all the different gods. And what are the relationship between the one God and the different gods? Are we really talking about the same thing when we're talking about these things? Where was I? And then he's going to quote some of their folks. For in him we live and move about and exist, as even some of your own poets have said. For we too are his offspring. So since we are God's offspring, we should not think the deity is like gold or silver or stone or an image made by human skill. Paul has to get that dig in. Hey, it's about the statues here. Enough with the statues, all right? Is it the statues, or what particular relevant aspect of the statuary is Paul offended by? Is it the fact that you can wield a statue? Is it the fact that you think that putting up a statue might curry favor with the powers, because they're so
Daisy Daimon.
Because they're so up about the diamonds? See, here again, it doesn't really work in English. You say diamonds, and people are going to think you're saying diamonds. If you say demons, then you got a problem. So,
Daisy Daimon.
I am a child. Anyway, therefore God was overlooked in... Therefore, although God has overlooked such times of ignorance... How many times in our world don't I see conversations about, well, why can't God just forgive just by overlooking? Paul says he overlooked it. Well, what does that mean? Well, what does it mean that Paul says God overlooked this stuff? How does that fit in your Christian narrative? Has overlooked such times of ignorance, he now commands all people everywhere to repent. What do you mean? When you mean everywhere, do you mean the people over in the Inca and the Maya and the Aztecs and the Chinese and the Aboriginal Australians? And what does now mean for that? Is it an existential now? Is it now through Paul, you Greeks are being commanded to stop your ignorance? And, well, yeah and no. And, well, how does language work? How does any of this work? Because he has set a day on which he is going to judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he designated, having provided proof to everyone by raising him from the dead. Well, now it's going to happen. It seems like Paul can walk around and do a lot of philosophizing, but once he talks about the resurrection of the dead, the synagogue pops off and the Areopagus pops off because, you think about Oscar Wilde's raised from the dead. Herod speaking in Oscar Wilde's play. I will not allow him to be raised from the dead. Okay, well, go ahead and try and stop him. Now, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some began to scoff, but others said, we will hear you again about this. So Paul left the Areopagus, but some people joined him and believed, among them Dionysius, who was a member of the Areopagus. So then he sets up the book for, pseudo Dionysius and the Areopagite. Jonathan Peugeot will tell you about him. A woman named Damaris and others with them. Now, why again drop these names? Well, if you read... I can't think of his name right now, but probably dropping these names so Luke's readers could say, well, if you're in Athens, look up Dionysius the Areopagite and talk to him about this conversation with Paul, and he'll tell you about it. And this woman, Damaris, she'll tell you about it too. These are probably two fairly high visibility people that if you went to Athens, you could find them and figure out, okay, here's people that can testify that Luke just isn't making stuff up. But right here in this story, and it's a very famous story, and it's one that loves to get trotted out by preachers. And there's all kinds of depths and levels to this story. Someone's walking back and forth past my door, and I'm going to go see who it is. Hang on. It was a church member dropping off something in the church mailbox. Well, what are we going to do with this text? And in fact, this text is so full of stuff. And again, if you just dig a little deeper, just like
Daisy Daimon.
It gets translated devout or religious. Religious people are fearful of demons. Well, yeah, that's true. But what do we mean by demons or diamonds? And Paul looks around, and why does that fear result in statuary? And then Paul quotes two pagans and says, yeah, this is kind of like us. And we're like, well, so how are we supposed to relate? Now, nobody's going to accuse Paul of not being antithetical. He was so antithetical that stuff popped off all the time. And nobody's going to accuse Paul of not, putting Jesus at the top of the hierarchy because, well, Jesus is Lord, and just read the rest of the stuff he wrote. But at the same time, he's taking time and talking in Athens and the Areopagus, and he's not going to stay there very long, but others will stay there. And, well, there will come a time when Athens will become Christian, but there'll be a lot of history between when Paul visited and when that would happen later. And all of the stuff that would happen in between would all be part of this story. So is God part of the public domain? Is the gospel part of the public domain? Can we get senses of the gospel by reading other books and by reading other things? I think part of what's been so powerful about the work of C.S. Lewis has been exactly that. And part of why I enjoy his book Miracles so much is because one way or another, you're going to have to figure out where Jesus fits into the world beyond the church. And there's going to be some antithetical elements to it. And there's going to be some common grace elements to it. What I mean by those things. There's going to be some times when Jesus makes claims that everyone sort of stops and it makes people uncomfortable. And there's going to be other aspects about him where people like, yeah, I'm okay with that part of Jesus. But that stuff about being God's son, okay, well, what do you mean by God? Well, and off we go. Now, at this point in the video, I'm seriously considering just deleting it, but it's a busy week, and I hate to just delete things. Part of me, which is why I'm probably not a great YouTuber, is I just put out this mess and let you sort it out, which is not the way to have a good, thriving YouTube channel. There needs to be consistent quality. So that when the YouTube consumer clicks on the video, they get their expectations satisfied. And this video, I don't know if it's going to satisfy any expectations, including the king and the queen in the comments section. But I guess part of the reason that the comment sort of stuck with me, and again, I'm not critiquing the comment. I'm such a conflicted individual that on one hand, part of my consciousness Congress, when I read that comment, stood up sort of like you folks out there in the UK with your very noisy parliament with your two sides, stood up and said, yeah, that's right. A bunch of the other people, maybe I have a consciousness parliament now to destroy my alliteration. A bunch of people said, no. And so Anselman sort of provoked that in my brain, as do many things. And I guess part of me part of me says if Jesus isn't Lord of all, then he's not who I was raised to believe he was. And if he is Lord of all, then he is the icon of the invisible God, as the book of Colossians says. And if that's the case, then, what Paul was traipsing about the ancient world doing was important. And okay, almost got him killed a lot of times, eventually did, got him arrested, got him stoned, shipwrecked, beaten, all of those things. Maybe, again, invoking a narrative at the final judgment when I'm called up. The Lord says, Vanderclay, they gave you that name, Paul? I don't know if you quite measure up. Well, maybe your parents thought it sounded nice. And in Dutch, there's a word, sputten, which is, maybe I'm making light of holy things. And before the video, my friend Hank called. I'm naming you Hank. I'm naming you Hank. And Hank calls me now and then, and we have a little chat. And Hank's from Chicago, and I'm from the New York area, and so we have a degree of, I don't know even what you call it. We have a degree of culture between us, a commonality of culture between us. Hank's been on the channel before, and part of it is, you both have to take yourself more seriously and less seriously at the same time. And if you're going to be a Christian, maybe even be a bad one. Well, what do you mean by that? I mean, understand and be okay with all of the ways you fall short. And again, it's be okay and not be okay, but in the right way. Yeah, I tweeted today because I was thinking about what am I going to do this week. I shouldn't do any more videos. I should get down to work on my New Year's Eve video, which I'll put on this channel again in the rough draft stream as I did the Christmas Eve one, and then my Sunday sermon, because Friday I don't plan on being in the office because it's New Year's Day. I'm going to be with the family, and Saturday is usually my day off, so I don't really want to go in the office that day, and I'm hoping that some more of my kids might be home. And because when you get to this age and the kids are in the 20s, you spend all the time you can with those kids if you get an opportunity, because they're starting to get busy and they're starting to go out. The Cat's in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon, Little Boy Blue and the Man on the Moon. Anyway, so I was reading through Kittle today about logos because I'm in the prologue of the Gospel of John. Again, what's with that lectionary? I keep going back to the prologue of the Gospel of John. I've got to preach it again. I got to figure out how to preach it again. And so I'm going to talk about the logos because it's the same issue. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, this logos, and of course Jordan Peterson energized that word for a whole bunch of people, and Anselman brought it up in his comment, and it very much has to do with whether God is in public domain or whether the gospel's in public domain, and in church or outside of the church, and all of those issues that get involved. And I'm reading along in Kittle, and a further demonstration is to be found in the fact that secular Greek, and I think, what on earth is secular Greek? Stoicism and Neoplatonism can split up the logos into many creative individual or partial logi in all the phenomena which invest the world with being and reality. To be sure, the logos is an expression of harmony. It itself is the spiritual bond which holds the world together at its heart. But it is not a mediating figure which stands independently between God and the world, only insofar as the constructive principle is also that which reveals the knowability of things, which can speak to the Greek logos having a mediatorial role, says Kittle, the big one. And again, after all of this Tom Holland stuff, thanks Tom Holland, I can no longer read a common term like secular Greek and not stop and ponder what on earth do we mean by that? Life used to be so simple. Well, I complexified my life and I turned what seemed to be clear into that which was muddy. Probably what I've done for some of you with Acts 17. But why do we do it? Well, because when the Gospel of John talks about the Word becoming flesh, there's so much packed into that. And even, I had to start reading about word and where did this Lego I speak? Speaking is gathering. It's assembling. And that, of course, triggered in me all of the stuff I'd been thinking about, how when I speak right now, I take this world too big for me to comprehend, and I distill it down, and I try to distill it into words, and I try to make sense of it, and then off we go into all of the meaning and everything else. And Jerusalem and Athens do have to speak together. And I guess I would maybe be in the Areopagus B team, because I'm not as well educated as I need to be, and my Greek is in bad shape, and my Hebrew's in worse, and I get stuff wrong, and I read books that are too hard for me, and I'm a spermologos. I pick up things and I don't get them right, and I get embarrassed by them, and I make crappy videos like this one. But I keep making videos, don't I? Those who know me well personally know why. It's like my wife says to me, you're probably on that video saying things wrong all the time. And I said, yeah, I am. And she says, but you're not going to stop. I said, no, I'm not going to. She watched me learn Spanish in the Dominican Republic, and she was horrified because she said, you go out there and you butcher the language. She had a degree in Spanish. I said, yeah, I do. One of my pre-language teachers said, if you're going to learn a language, you need to make 1 million mistakes. Might as well get going. So if I'm going to learn something about the world and how it all fits together, I'm going to make 1 million mistakes. So might as well get going. And that's why I have no problem with people say, I haven't watched all your videos. And I think, well, that's probably a sign of mental health. But probably the whole reason I got into making videos and talking with you all, and I suppose the reason you listen to me, or however many people will eventually listen to this video, is because we want to know how it all fits together. And we want a way to God. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, what is God? Think about that little bit that I read from Mere Christianity. He's the source of light and life and love and joy. Don't you want to be close to that? Don't you want to emulate that? Isn't this beautiful gift of life that we've been given? Don't you want to make more life? Not just babies, but don't not include babies. Yeah. If this is going to make any sense, it has to be in public domain. And if Paul can be patient with the Areopagites, well, let's be patient in this Areopagus called YouTube and in the Discord server. And let's be savvy about this. What do I mean by that? I mean, so sometimes be a little antithetical, sometimes be a little shrewd and sharp, sometimes use a little clickbaity title, but in everything, show love. What do I mean by that? I mean, go after ideas, go after the diamonds with everything you've got. But that person that the diamonds are moving, love that person. Well, why? Because that's what Jesus told you to do. And sometimes loving means taking a philosophical scalpel to an idea. And sometimes it might warn them, say, hang on, this is going to hurt a little bit. But then go after it. And people will get upset and they'll say ouch and things will happen. But go after it. And ask hard things about terms that are used. Secular Greek. What on earth is that? Is there any such thing? Go after these things. Try and pick up Jerusalem in one hand and Athens in the other, and watch the sparks fly when you sort of put them together. We're full of all these competing desires, and I thought about the title, as so often happened to my crappy little videos. It's often not until after the video that I title the thing, because it's not maybe it's only a few hours after that I think, well, that video was really about this. And in fact, they might not have even mentioned that in the video, but Well, okay, I'll lay my cards on the table. I'm a Christian minister. I'm named after the Apostle Paul, that or my uncle's middle name. And I like to proclaim or evangelize, as it seemed the English Bible was a little reluctant to say. And, well, why would I want to do that? Because I think Jesus is good. And I think God and the gospel, in some sense, are their own thing and yet belong to everyone. Or actually, everything belongs to him. That's sort of what it means to be creator. And so what I see with militant atheism is that it's a polemic against a Cartesian dualism, which it finds offensive to their heightened view of humanity. And they also want one coherent world together, which means, well, let's talk. And let's compare notes. And let's have a conversation, which is attempting to compare notes about things. And yeah, if you say something that I think is crazy, I'll tell you. And if you think I'm part of what's so refreshing about YouTube and having conversations outside the church is that when you say something which is really important or big, people will respond to it. Whereas in the church, they're all kind of drowsy. Yeah, Jesus is Lord. If you really believe it, it's really important. We have a desire to know, a desire to wield, and a desire to worship. So, maybe worst video ever. Is God and the gospel in the public domain? Can we find it by looking around? The Apostle Paul seems to say God wants us to look around. God wants us to ask hard questions. God wants us to seek him. Well, what does that mean? What do you mean by God? What do you mean by seek? God wants us to put the world together. And now I'm going to bear some of my Protestantism here. Maybe it's not just my Protestantism, but if you're working in a lab, if you're seeking the best way to sell cars or the best way to mine iron or the best way to assemble almonds in the Central Valley so that it can produce almond milk. What on earth does that word mean? And on and on and on and on and on. That this is my Father's world, and everything here speaks of him. My friend John Van Sloten does some fun stuff up there in Calgary, Alberta, with his preaching through all kinds of other things. But how does God bear witness to himself in this world? And how much can we learn about him? But then Anselman comes about and says, yeah. And Christians say he revealed himself definitively in the person of Jesus Christ. What does that mean? How do we answer that question? How do we assess that claim? I don't know. I don't get tired of looking at these questions. So, am I going to put this video out? Yeah, I am. Is it going to be horrible? Let me know in the comments section. But I like talking to Brett, and I like talking to Anselman. And I know Carl has given up on me because I don't pursue natural law, and I believe in too much God number two. And in some ways, that's the line that Anselman is sort of playing with right here. It's God number one and God number two. God number one that Paul speaks about in Acts 17, who can be clearly known. Romans 1. You can find him. You can use reason, which again, Lewis via miracles is already a gift. So we're using God's own gift to find him. And you can use reason, and we can talk about this, and we can chew on it. But at the same time, he comes and in Jesus, but Jesus doesn't sort of poof and everything evaporates, all the questions evaporate and everything just sort of locks in. No, far from it. Well, why not? Well, if Jesus is God, why? And then, okay, well, why do you have those expectations? What do you think about yourself? Do you think that you are so brilliant and bold that everything's going to be clear to you and you're going to know it right away? And when people talk like that, I think, I'm not that way. I've watched myself. And when I watch myself, I realize how ignorant and silly and stupid and lazy and all these other things that I am. I know that about myself. And my wife will say, yeah, and you still think a lot about yourself, don't you? I'm still making videos. Still not embarrassed by some of the things that maybe I should be. Is God and the gospel in the public domain? Yeah, God number one surely is. God number two requires revelation. And then once he is revealed, and of course for Paul, well, the proof of it was the resurrection of the dead. Well, why would that be proof? And of what? Well, for Paul, it's a linchpin, and for me too. I agree with that. Because, well, why? Well, you can have all these right ideas, but again, you're judged by what you do. Well, what is doing? And now we're sort of back in Petersonian land. What is doing? Doing is in some ways the final working out of all of the vague head stuff into the complexity of the real world. And so Jesus comes and he does. And what does that mean? And what sense does that make of the world? And how should that change our behavior? And then what is the church, this group of people that tries in a very formal way to bear witness to him? And of course, Paul goes and blows up all these synagogues, not literally. They all have splits and fights because he goes in there. And again, I'm talking to Jacob in an hour or so. Jordan Peterson comes along and relieves people of certain things that had been possessing them. And of course, those who remain possessed by them continue to be upset and offended by him. And others sort of say, no, I'm free of some of these things because of him. And he sort of does it in Jesus' name and sort of not. So, yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm not done with this. But I guess we're getting towards the end of the year, and I should thank you. Thank you for watching such a unorganized, rambly YouTuber. I've certainly read plenty of comments that said word salad and get to the point. And yeah, and if y'all were bothered, maybe that's the selection that I've made in my audience, that I don't know what it says about you, but I know what it says about me. And it's not always flattering what it says about me, but I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm going to keep with these conversations. And I'm going to keep talking to at least as many that I can who come my way, if I can. And because I think God and the gospel do belong in public domain. And I think they are the best way to live and the best way to think. And I know it sounds really trite, but you sort of fall in love with Jesus. And you fall in love with the God of the Old Testament even. And as Mary would say, he's male and we're female. So I guess it's sort of a grand historical bachelor program and or bachelor show. And the only thing is that the church is his bride. And on and on and on. And now I'm really rambling. No, I started rambling right at the start. So does God and the gospel belong in the public domain? Let me know in the comment section. I know the Queen and the King are going to have comments about it, so I wish you well.